Well, following months of pressure, Keir Starmer has announced his resignation as the UK Prime Minister and leader of the Labour Party, kick-starting a process that will see Britain getting a new Prime Minister yet again. In a speech outside 10 Downing Street, Starmer conceded he had lost the support of his Labour Party MPs. Starmer also said he had informed King Charles of his decision to resign so that a new Labour leader and Prime Minister could be elected.
I will ask the National Executive Committee of the Labour Party to set out a timetable with nominations opening on the 9th of July and completed by the summer recess. In the case of a contest, this will ensure a new leader is in place before Parliament returns in September.
Now, Starmer's departure follows mounting pressure from within Labour Party after disappointing election performances, internal divisions and growing concerns over the party's ability to counter the rise of Reform UK. Starmer said he would remain in office until the Labour Party elects a new leader and Prime Minister. Well, several senior ministers and party figures are now being discussed as potential successors as Labour prepares for a leadership contest. And Andy Burnham, he is widely seen as the leading candidate to succeed Starmer. Hours after Keir Starmer resigns as leader of the Labour Party, Burnham was sworn in as the new MP for Makerfield. He has confirmed that he would seek to replace Starmer as leader of the ruling Labour Party and eventually the Prime Minister. Similarly, Angela Rayner remains one of the most recognisable figures in the party and is often mentioned as a possible successor. Other potential challenges for the UK top job include former Health Secretary Wes Streeting as well. And Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood is in the race as well. Now, the leader of the hard-right anti-immigration reform UK party, Nigel Farage, has called for general elections to be held after Starmer announced his resignation. With Starmer's exit, the list of UK Prime Ministers who have left office before the next general election, it continues to grow from the departures of Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. Frequent changes in leadership have become a defining feature of British politics, especially in the post-Brexit era. Meanwhile, Russian presidential envoy Kirill Dmitriev has celebrated British Prime Minister Starmer's resignation, even publicly claiming that Russia did this jointly by exposing Starmer's policies. Starmer's resignation comes less than 2 years after Labour's sweeping victory in the 2024 general election. He was nearly ousted in March over his ill-fated decision to appoint Peter Mandelson, a known associate of the late US sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. This was as the UK's ambassador to Washington. To discuss further on this, let me welcome my guest at the moment, Adam Schwartz, writer and political commentator. He's joining us live on the broadcast from London. Adam, welcome to the broadcast. Starmer has finally given in, hasn't he? And how long before we see the next successor and the Prime Minister of United Kingdom?
Well, I think at this point, Starmer's resignation was really not a surprise to anyone. It's been increasingly clear over the last few months, I think particularly since last month's local elections, that his position as Prime Minister was just completely untenable. I think really the final issue that made him realise that he had no path to remaining in power was really the kind of irreversible loss of authority that he had within his own parliamentary Labour Party, particularly after Andy Burnham's very large victory in the by-election last week, which has seen him return to Parliament today, which allows him to run for leader of the Labour Party, which I think really saw a kind of major shift in terms of influence of the Labour Party away from Starmer towards an actual viable alternative candidate. But as you say, you know, Starmer did announce a sort of rough timetable for a new leader of the Labour Party and a new Prime Minister really to be in office by September. But I think really a lot of expectations today are in fact that there won't be a contested election where you have several different candidates running, but actually rather there'll be more of a coronation with just Andy Burnham running. I mean, we certainly saw Wes Streeting a few hours ago already announced that he's not going to stand despite a lot of hype around that. And actually he is going to be supporting Andy Burnham. And I think he was really considered as really one of the main contenders against Andy Burnham. So I think really Labour MPs are trying to kind of coalesce around this idea that actually they don't really want a very messy contested leadership election, and actually just having Andy Burnham sort of neatly fall into the position will actually be the best case scenario for them at the moment.
Yes, Adam, let's also talk about the Brexit. It's been almost 10 years now, and UK might possibly get its 7th Prime Minister. And the politics of Brexit on its own, it has proven to be extremely unstable for the country. What do you think is the way out? And do you consider Brexit to be one of the cases behind UK's current condition?
Well, a lot of commentators and people in the UK today are wondering, how could we be entering our 6th Prime Minister over the last 5 years and our 7th over the last decade? And really, you don't have to think too hard to actually think what happened in 2016 that really triggered this chaos in a country that was long considered to be one of the most stable democracies in the world. And of course, as you mentioned, it was Brexit. We voted to leave the European Union by a thin margin in the summer of 2016, 10 years ago. And really, since then, Britain has kind of collapsed politically. We've burnt through several years basically just trying to implement the decision of Brexit, which of course was very difficult because no one actually had one particular idea of what Brexit meant. And I think ultimately we are in this chaos, and we will continue to be in this chaos because of what Brexit has done to our economy and our society. Because ultimately Brexit prevents any government from trying to allow the kind of economy and public services and living standards that really British voters expect. And actually, rather than improve all the problems in British society in terms of wages, in terms of jobs, in terms of housing, that was promised in the referendum, actually it's made all of those issues so much worse. And I think ultimately it has kind of bound British prime ministers in a way that they weren't done before, because ultimately the best way to get voters to vote for you is actually to grow the economy, to increase living standards, to have good public services. And actually you have very, very few levers in which you can actually do that. And of course, ultimately the best way of doing that is through growth. And Brexit really constrains the UK's growth to a massive degree. We've already lost about 6% of our growth. So I think really in terms of looking about the wider shot about how did the UK end up in this chaos, of course it's Brexit. But of course, the crucial point here as well is who is waiting in the wings, who is leading in opinion polls in the UK. It's Nigel Farage's Reform UK. And of course, who was one of the main leaders of Brexit over the last few decades? It was Nigel Farage. So in fact, he is the main beneficiary of his own failed policy. So I think really the UK has to look very seriously about our current kind of constitutional economic setup, because it's simply not working for the UK, and it will continue to cause problems for as long as we're outside the European Union.
But Adam, it's almost like a revolving door now. It looks like it's one of the fastest changing jobs in the United Kingdom, the role of Prime Minister. And even if Andy Burnham comes as the successor of Keir Starmer, what is to be said that he will not face the same exact challenges? And how can he take UK out of this chaos that you mentioned?
Well, I think that is really the fundamental point that, really many people don't really have the answers to. I think the main issue that was actually constraining Keir Starmer's government was the fact that he actually couldn't borrow more money to fund public services and try to increase living standards for a lot of people, because fundamentally the bond markets will not allow the UK's government to actually borrow much more money. So really, it's very difficult to see how Andy Burnham will actually fundamentally change the situation. But, in reality, these are political issues. And Keir Starmer is, polling as the worst prime minister really since records began in the 1970s. And so fundamentally, the party had to deal with that. But I think, there's going to be a lot of big decisions for Andy Burnham to make. If it is a coronation and there's no contested election, I think Burnham will actually be in a weaker position, because if he had been elected, at least by Labour members, he would have some kind of mandate perhaps to deviate somewhat from Labour's manifesto in 2024. But of course, if there is no leadership election, then actually that creates some kind of perceived democratic deficit for him as Prime Minister, which of course will only increase calls that there should be an election. So I think ultimately we might see Andy Burnham actually having to stick quite closely to the Labour manifesto, which of course, that's exactly what Keir Starmer was doing. I think really the key issue for Burnham here is actually going to be on communications, because Keir Starmer was really perceived as not a very good communicator after the election. Really, Burnham needs to try to push forward, if he is the leader, needs to push forward this idea that actually the government is a government of change. And that is going to be quite difficult to do, considering that his policy options are actually quite limited.
Sure, Adam. It'll be interesting to look at the race to power in the United Kingdom. Thank you for joining us on the broadcast and getting your insights.
Good to be with you.
Well, now let's listen to how people are reacting to Keir Starmer's resignation and potential candidates who are in fray to replace him.
I'm not surprised. I think he's done the right thing. I think he needs to step aside and let someone else take over. So, yeah, I think it's a good thing.
It appears to be a foregone conclusion that Andy Burnham is going to become Prime Minister. It looks like it might be a coronation. There is some debate that it should be contested, and it would be more healthy if there was some form of contest.
I'm glad, really. Just needed a change. I think like most of the country are probably just feeling the same way as what I am. Like all you're hearing is like how much of the bad job he's doing. And I did want to vote Labour in the first place. But I'm just worried it's going to be out of the frying pan and into the fire now with potentially this Andy Burnham coming in.
Well, I think it's good because I'm living here 18 years, and since I came over here, this country was beautiful. You could work, live, do whatever you like. Right now, you just work like slave, and you don't have money for nothing. I'm a hardworking labor. I work in construction site, and it's really this country went down for a couple of years already.